All right, good evening. Welcome to our LPA meeting for December the 11th. Tonight's going to be a little bit different. We're going to do mostly training this evening, so if anybody out there in TV Zoom land is excited about this, you're welcome to join us and learn a little bit about LPA. So the first thing on the agenda is the pledge. Mr. Cadenhead.
Would you like to do roll call?
Oh, little detail. I was just seeing if you were paying attention. Go ahead.
Okay. Cheryl Culberson,
Here.
Patrick Foley, Tony Cameron,
Here.
Susan Raffanello, and James Ryan.
Here.
Lori and Debbie didn't do Lori.
Yeah. Lori Lalonde
Here.
and Deb Gillis.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. So Susan may be joining us in a few minutes on Zoom. Hopefully she can join us this evening. And we'll take 30 seconds and introduce Patrick. Do you want to do a quick introduction of yourself? Sure. Okay.
I'm Patrick Foley. I've been a resident of the Keys for about 20 years, and I think I'm going on about 5 years here in Islamorada. I'm owned an advertising and public relations business here in the Keys for many years. In fact, I used to do Islamorada Community Entertainment. ICE was one of my clients for many years. So I used to help put on Bay Jam and all the events that they put on. Dabbled in politics all my life, around the edges, never as a candidate, but I've been worked in government in Michigan, in Illinois, and down here.
We only dabble too, so it's okay. Okay, thank you. We're glad you could join us. Now we have the pledge. Mr. Cadenhead, would you lead us, please?
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Is there any request for deletions or emergency additions to the agenda? There's only one thing on the agenda, so I guess we can't delete that, so. Okay, moving on. General public comments, something that's not concerning our one topic of the evening, which is training. Do I have any?
We should do Van.
I do have a member.
I'm Van Cadenhead from Islamorada. I'd like to focus your attention on your handout tonight, page 8, which has to do with the Village Comprehensive Plan, future land use goals, objectives, and implementing policies, which is your main charge of what you do here. And I'm saying this for all you who've already sat on it and know exactly what I'm talking about, and for the benefit of our new member. Welcome, sir. I have a problem with the development of T-table, and I believe I've expressed it in here before, and I hope that at some point there's a deferral on that decision, and you all have to make a decision and a recommendation, which has not happened yet, to the council about this. But I would just like to point out, if you're on page 8 with me here, you direct development only to sites that can accommodate such activity without promoting conflict with natural resources. And I think this is exactly what's happening at the T-table. Skip down to keep development away from shoreline and wetlands. This would be an extreme problem at T-Table because it's located right in the middle of a bunch of mud flats and grass flats. And there was what I consider a unethical flood zone change, which happened without your knowledge or the knowledge of the council, which changed from a V zone to an A zone for the purpose of development. And I think this was totally unethical to have it done surreptitiously like that. And I just want to bring that to your attention when the problem, I'm going to bring it again when they have their presentation from T-Table. The grass bed flats are in danger. There's, in the next one down on page 8, and also parking is a problem because he wants to introduce 30 vacation rental units on that one little island. And the last on page 8 ensures that the character and location of land uses incorporate best management practices, and I don't see this T-Table project being one of them, and it would certainly lead to environmental degradation, which is to say with an A zone, you could seawall the entire island and fill it up to the height with fill and build 31 units on it. And I just don't see in any way that could possibly be beneficial to anybody but the owner of the island. It would be terrible for traffic and any number of other problems which are going to come up in your presentation whenever they come out of their deferral. So thank you for the opportunity to express this, and good luck.
Thank you, Van. Is there anybody else, a member of the public? I know there's nobody present. Do I have anybody on Zoom?
No.
Okay. Moving on, we do need to approve in the consent agenda is the minutes. Do I have a motion for approval?
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
I have a first and a second.
Second.
Lori Valland,
Yes.
Tony Hammond,
Yes.
Cheryl Culbertson,
Yes.
Patrick Foley,
Am I eligible to vote on this since I wasn't here the last time?
no.
Okay, I vote no. Abstain.
Susan Raffanello, she doesn't know. James Ryan,
Yes.
and Chair Deb Gillis.
Yes. Okay, moving on, we have nothing in public hearings. Chair and local planning agency members, anything from any of us? Seeing none. Future agenda items, planning director and village manager. Nothing particular? Okay, and village attorney.
All right, so I guess we're on. To formally introduce myself to everyone, my name is Allison Smith with the law firm of Weiss, Serota, Helfman, Cole, and Bierman. I'm here with my colleague Roger Poe. He's going to handle the substantive piece of this training regarding your responsibilities and duties. I'm going to be talking to you about sunshine law and public records law. Just a little bit about myself, and then we're going to get started. So I have been practicing for just shy of 20 years. I've been 14 years with the firm now. I love practicing law, and government is what I do. So I'm excited to do this training. My training is a little different because I don't just talk the whole time. I try to make the training as interactive as possible so that you won't fall asleep on me. And it is important. It's very practical. I like to do pragmatic topics. These are pragmatic topics, and these affect what you have to do as committee members. So with that, we can jump right into it. I see my, the slide is up. I don't know if you, okay, there we go. All right, so we're talking about the Sunshine Law first. It was enacted in 1967, and it's codified or in the Florida statutes in Chapter 286. You can find all of the requirements in there. basically what the Sunshine Law does is it provides a right of access to these proceedings like this. That's why we have people that can spectate and watch and see what's happening. So whether it's a public board or a commission, at both the state and local levels. And you'll find pretty much every single state in the United States has something like this. They might call it something different, but it's like the Sunshine Law. Of course, Florida had to say Sunshine Law because we are the Sunshine State. So it's a little bit of a play on those words. So it applies to elected officials and appointed boards if there's any sort of deliberation or formal action that is taken. And we're going to talk about that in depth as we go on. So the basic requirements of the Sunshine Law are the meetings need to be open to the public, right? So, and there have been meetings that have been scheduled at places like the Ritz or something, and then that causes a problem because is there going to be a fee for entry? Can people get in? Do you have to be a guest, a paying guest, in order to participate? You know, it needs to be open. And then there has to be reasonable notice of the meetings and minutes taken. So open to the public, reasonable notice, and you have to take minutes. Those are the basic requirements. When does it apply? So any gathering, whether formal or casual, of 2 or more members of the same board or commission to discuss some matter on which foreseeable action will be taken by the board or commission. So when I first started doing this type of law a long time ago, the way I remembered Sunshine Law, because I used to only represent the private sector, was using the Bible. And you don't have to be a Christian or anybody that believes in the Bible, but there's a verse that says where 2 or more are gathered. So if you always think where 2 or more are gathered, if there's 2 or more of you, Sunshine Law applies. So we go back to the slide that talks about the requirements. 2 or more of us are here. This needs to be in place. Got to be open to the public. Have to have notice to the people that we're going to be talking about this issue. And we have to have minutes taken where 2 or more are gathered. That's how I always remembered it, and it never failed me. And I know you can appreciate that, Tony. Okay, so the venue. Generally, public meetings must take place in public buildings. And again, you don't want to unreasonably deny access. Remember, think of transparency as being the thing that's leading you, that's guiding you. Everything we're doing is open and transparent. So that's the whole thing about why they don't want 2 or more of you to be discussing something in the parking lot, for example. You need to have it here where people can watch us on TV or on Zoom or come to the meeting. You want to avoid what we call a chilling effect. So you don't want to do anything that's going to make somebody feel as though, what's going on there? There's some sort of conspiracy or something because they're not telling us what's going on. You want to just put everything in the open. So the whole rule is that you want to frustrate any opportunity for somebody to evade transparency and openness. You want to make sure that whatever you're doing, nobody can say you're not being open. All right, so now, that's me talking a lot. This is basics, but we'll learn more. This is how I learn, so I always think people sort of learn like this. Maybe that's wrong, but so I like to do true or false questions, and you're learning as you're answering these questions, and hopefully some of it sticks in. But if you don't remember anything at all from all of this training, please try to remember where 2 or more are gathered, Sunshine Law applies. Just 2 or more are gathered. Just keep that in your mind, and then you should be okay. All right, so, and please participate. Okay, so the Sunshine Law only applies if there's a quorum. Is that true or false?
False. False.
Let's see if you're right. You are right, you are correct. It's false. Because, why? What did we just, I just want to be sure. Right, just exactly what I said and I've been harping on. 2 or more are gathered. So you don't need a quorum. You don't need a majority. You just need 2 or more people, okay? All right, meetings of public boards or commissions must be recorded. Is that true or false? Meetings of public boards or commissions must be recorded. Oh, I hear false and I hear true. Let's see who's correct on that one. So it's false. You don't actually have to record it. We choose to record it, and a lot of cities choose to record it. But just the minutes. Remember, if you go back a couple slides previous, I don't want to keep going back, but a couple slides prior to this where we talked about minutes, right? So you can do the old school traditional, especially some of those more traditional, I'm trying to find a good way to describe it, but some of those more traditional cities, they don't record. They just take minutes, okay? So we just have to make sure minutes are taken and they're open to the public. If you do record like this, then it's a public record. Of course, we are going to talk about public records as well. All right, so actually this slide doesn't apply to you. We'll go off to the next one. Okay, advisory boards are subject to the Sunshine Law. Is that true or false? All right, so I hear true. It's a trick question. If, you know, attorneys like trick questions, so I can't give you all true or false, yes or no, right? So it's a trick question. So the answer is maybe. So not every advisory board. The question that's going to be looked at by a court or a fact finder, decision maker, is going to be, is it a decision-making board? So even boards that only can make recommendations are actually not going to make final decisions, because most advisory boards can't actually make a final decision, but they can make a recommendation that's given significant weight, like you, for example, would be subject to the Sunshine Law. If they're just fact-finding, no, but if they are going to be deliberating and giving recommendations that are given weight, yes. So a board like you, for example, would definitely be subject to the Sunshine Law. This is a little bit small, but I could give you this. So this is a case example I put in there to kind of drive the point home. So in this case, out of Palm Bay, the city manager had asked a number of people to sit in on the interviews for their police chief. This is a long time ago. And the group sat with the manager, and they put together some questions that would be useful to hire basically the best person that could be there. So what the court said is, those interviews were not public hearings when they were sitting down and coming up with ideas for the interviews. They're not public hearings because only the manager had the function to hire. And that group wasn't actually making a recommendation. They were just fact-finding. They were gathering information to give it to the city manager. They were not actually making any recommendations to him about who to hire. So that kind of tells you like the distinction between fact finders and people who are actually like you, like really digging in, diving deep, and making recommendations. This is another one, also kind of small. I didn't realize it would come up that small. But in this one, the president of the St. Petersburg Junior College had met with a group periodically with some college employees to talk about basically like their terms and conditions of employment. And there was a person who was a union steward who wasn't included in the meetings, wanted to be in the meetings, but they were closed. And the appellate court said the group that was meeting, they were just fact-finding. They weren't actually making recommendations, so it wasn't actually a public meeting. All right. Now, what if the advisory committee that we're talking about can only give a recommendation that can be ignored by the council? Is that committee still subject to the Sunshine Law? True or false? True, right? So even if they can ignore it, you're still subject to the Sunshine Law. Which we won't say that on the record. All right. Boards can vote by secret ballot. Is that true or false?
Subject to sunshine, false.
So I hear someone. So it's false, right? Again, transparency. So if you're making sure that you're transparent, you're going to get these questions correct each time. Boards can vote by written ballot. Is that true or false?
True. As long as the ballots are held. I don't have a problem.
All right, let's see. So Deb says true, but you'd have to have a public record. So it's true as long as the votes are made openly public. The name of the person who voted on that particular issue, the particular way they did, is written, and the public can inspect the ballots. And believe it or not, this has come up. I mean, that's why it's a question, and so all of these are pretty much taken from cases. This has come up because it can be uncomfortable to express your position openly, right? And so people don't necessarily always want to say yay, nay, especially if, I mean, like today, there's no one there, but sometimes you'll have a very controversial item. I've gone to meetings where, you know, they want to erect a building in a community that's normally residential, and I mean, the entire community comes out. And it can be very intimidating, you know, to have all those people. So sometimes board members want to just put it down on paper, and then it's less for some reason it seems a little bit less impactful on the board member when it's just read out, as opposed to, Deb saying, well, I think it's a terrible idea or something, and then everybody attacks you for that. So yes, you can, but you have to make sure that all of these requirements are met at the same time. Okay, a board member can ask staff what another member thinks or that member's views on a board issue. Is that true or false?
Ask staff.
Okay, so let's read the question again just to make sure that we're clear on what the question is asking. So the question is, for example, to Jennifer, for example, could you go to Jennifer and say, hey, this item is coming before us for Publix. What does everybody think? I mean, what are people telling you? What are people saying about that, the building of a new Publix or a Winn-Dixie or something? So yes. So the answer is false. So you are not allowed to do, under the Sunshine Law, what you can't do yourself. You're not allowed to do that, like use them as a proxy or a conduit, because you're basically communicating with each other. The idea is that, we're two or more, if there's two or more of you discussing an issue, it needs to be like this, right? It needs to be in a public forum. So they don't want you to subvert that rule by then using a person, like Jennifer or Anita or somebody else, to do that same thing, because you're still talking, you're just talking indirectly. It's kind of like when you have a restraining order or something and they'll say no communication. That means like not indirect either. You can't speak, you can't communicate with that person. It's the same sort of thing. Okay, so no, you cannot talk to staff about, well, what does everybody think? And the reason I brought this one up and I added this one to it, and I just added this today, is because it happens a lot. Not that you're intentionally doing it, you're just sort of thinking, well, what does everybody think about this issue? Not that you're going to them because you're thinking, I want to violate the Sunshine Law, but just that it's normal human nature to want to know what's been discussed. And staff is at any given time talking to all of you. So it's very easy to kind of lapse into that. So just remember, again, go back to two or more. There's two or more of us talking about something, whether it's directly or indirectly. We need this forum.
And if I could add
Yes,
something.
of course.
By the way, just as a reminder to all the board members, my name is Roger Poe. I think something that was very helpful for me personally to understand the Sunshine Law as it relates to this particular issue that Allison is mentioning is we look at technicality. Technicality doesn't matter. What matters is what's actually being communicated, right? If there's two members that are communicating, that's it. That's the sunshine. It doesn't matter if it's through a staff member. It doesn't matter if it's through a smoke signal or a fish that you tie a note to. What matters is that there's a communication between two or more members. So form doesn't take over substance.
Okay. All righty. So boards are allowed to limit the amount of time a member of the public speaks at their meetings. Is that true or false? Because we do it all the time. We just did it to this gentleman here. So you are absolutely allowed to limit the time, just like they can in a regular council meeting. You can limit that time. No issue whatsoever. The amount of time a member of the public is allowed to speak at a board meeting is dictated by law. Is that true or false? All right, let's see what the answer is. False. So you prescribe those rules. You decide how long you want it to be or how short you want it to be. Typically, most cities, most places, they use 3 minutes. We use 3 minutes. I've been told that Miami-Dade County only gives 2. That's a very short period of time because, as you can see, 3 minutes goes so quickly. But that's also not illegal. That's perfectly fine to give just 2 minutes. I'm not giving you any ideas. Okay, a member of the public is allowed to record a public meeting, such as a commission meeting. Is that true or false?
Absolutely true.
I hear absolutely true, an emphatic true on the phone. So yes, members of the public are allowed to record public meetings. That's not an issue at all. Sometimes it can be jarring to have somebody recording, but it's perfectly fine for them to do that. The news crew, the media could be in here recording us, and we'd have to just smile and wave and hope that we're having a good hair day that particular day. An individual is allowed to not only tape record, but to video record a meeting of an advisory board. True or false?
Be true.
So just what I just talked about, that a news crew could be here, and it's literally happened to me where they lift up the cameras and they're videotaping you. There's no permission that they need to get. This is not like the private sector where there's so much red tape for them to get into a company to record a meeting. I mean, that just probably would never happen unless you're invited. We are always invited, save for a few meetings, to come in and hear any of our public meetings. But to that point, can any members of the public be excluded from public meetings like this?
Those that are disruptive.
What do we think? I hear somebody on
Those
Zoom.
that are disruptive.
I'd say yes or no.
So the basic answer is no, but they cannot be police vehicles, no. But
You think
if there's been an issue, then they can be excluded.
Okay, so that is correct. So yes, the general answer is no. But you are absolutely allowed to take any action that needs to be taken to prohibit someone who's disruptive, creating a scene, alarming you, potentially dangerous from being in the meeting. So that's why if you go to any city, they always have a sergeant at arms or somebody that's in law enforcement or public safety to literally protect the peace and safety of everybody who's at that meeting. I have seen it happen several times where somebody has been ejected from a meeting because of that, because they've been engaging in behavior that people find alarming or concerning. They're threatening a council person. That's literally happened. So those people, you don't want to have them there, because as you probably have seen the news where people have gone into meetings and done very bad things and caused harm to people. So yes, that's perfectly permissible if, to maintain decorum. And it's not just somebody threatening your life, it's also somebody who's acting in a way the meeting is just literally gone haywire because of this person's behavior. Okay, a board must allow any member of the public to speak at a public meeting, even if a large group of people wants to speak or comment on the same issue, right? So a lot of the land development items, like I said, like that one I went to, there probably were 200 people that came out to speak at that meeting on that particular item. So does a board have to allow each person to speak, even though it's 200 of them that have come forward?
True.
All right,
Sure.
Let's see the answer. So you can say, can we have a representative that speaks for everybody? If it's the same thing, a lot of times what you'll hear, even at that meeting, is that the mayor who was in charge of the meeting said, when somebody would come down, they would say, if any of you back there are going to say the same thing, we need somebody with like a new comment that they want to make. We understand, we got it, you don't want this building to be erected there, it's residential, your children, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's not enough space, there's not enough lanes for traffic, so you don't, because otherwise the meeting goes on and on and on and on and on. No, that's also within the discretion of whoever is leading the meeting. So a lot of times whoever is leading the meeting just has all 200 people go, and if we're here till 2 a.m., we're here till 2 a.m. But to maintain order and to make sure that people aren't literally falling asleep during the meeting, you can expedite it that way, as long as they're not saying something that's different than everyone else. The Sunshine Law addresses only communications concerning matters presently pending before the board. Is that true or false? That is correct. So that is false. Now, the reason that's false is because it also applies to matters that the test is it may foreseeably come before the board for action. So there is a potential that this item is going to come before you. Now, you will know. You will know if that's foreseeable, because anything that's land development related, something's being constructed, it's going to come before. So you shouldn't have that dialogue outside of this, 2 or more of you shouldn't be having that dialogue outside of this forum here. And when I'm saying dialoguing, I'm including texting each other. So not just talking in the parking lot, I know I mentioned that earlier, but texting each other about it, calling each other about it, messaging each other on social media about it. All those things are included when I say communicate. So when the statute was first created, this was back in 1967, they did not have social media, but the idea, the intention was to prevent communication in any form. So now we've evolved. So when you look at the cases are addressing the way that we communicate with each other now, which is not just in person or on the phone, but, meaning a phone call. We're texting each other. We're doing probably more than we call. We're texting. I know I'm guilty of texting more than I call, and using social media as well to communicate our ideas and thoughts. Okay, so same thing. So make sure, because we'll get into public records in a minute, but those text messages are public records, so you don't want people to request it and see that two or more of you are on a thread talking about something that is either before you or could foreseeably come before you. Okay? We'll skip that one. Okay. Can two or more board members be involved in the same civil, social, or charitable organization?
Of course.
Okay. So here's the rule. Yes, you can, but just make sure when you go to those meetings, you're not discussing things that are either before you or could foreseeably come before you. This is always a very tricky one because sometimes the optics can cause people to think things, right? Why are they talking? Why are Deb and Tony seem to be really engrossed in conversation? What are they talking about? Their kids, Thanksgiving dinner. But just the fact that people see you speaking and they know that you're on the same committee, that can lend itself to misperceptions. So I always say, especially when I give training to elected officials, which I do all the time, I always say, be nice to each other. And it's okay to be friendly. It's okay to be in the same organizations. They are most of the time. But just limits the interaction so that people don't start to say, I bet you they're deliberating outside of the sunshine. No, we're just having a nice discussion. So it's always a tricky one because you're involved in the same organizations and you want to be friendly, but then, people can get different ideas. All right, the Sunshine Law also applies to private entities, so not just to the public sector. I hear false. Anybody with a different viewpoint? Okay, so let's see what the answer is to that question. So it's false unless the private entity has been created by the public entity. The public entity has delegated its governmental functions to that private entity, or that private entity plays a pivotal role in the public entity's decision-making process. So if any of those three things is true, then those records that are maintained by that place, as well as the operations when they're having meetings that could affect the public, are subject to the Sunshine Law requirements. Which, can you remember the three things? Anybody remember the three? So now we're going back. I like to do this to go back to revisit. Anybody remember? Three things? Yes, two or more, but what are the three things? Once we know the sunshine, so once we know two or more, cause public meeting, minutes, one more thing, starts with N. Notice, that's it, there you go, got it. You're listening. Okay, so here's an example, just an example I wanted to use. So the planning commission that was appointed by the city, so we're talking about, when a private and a public, when they kind of cross over. A planning commission that was appointed by the city met with a planning firm, so a private planning firm that was retained by the city to draw up a plan to revise its local zoning ordinances. So the commission actually met with this group, this firm. And the plan was then adopted. The plan they came up with was adopted at a public meeting. The Supreme Court said when you met, meaning that when you, the commission, met with that firm, that meeting should have been open. So see, we would never do that. We would, if we were having courting firms, they would come here. They would come and they would make the presentation. It would be on Zoom or on TV. But that group actually went privately to that firm. You can't do that. All right. So it's just explaining why, which is, you're subject to the sunshine. That group was subject to the Sunshine Law. Another example is.
The company itself in creating whatever they're creating isn't a sunshine violation.
No, but see where the problem came in. So
It's when they invited the council or the committee or whatever.
went over there.
Okay.
So see, all the time when we're interacting with these people, like our vendors who do architects, engineers, they're just in their firms, just drafting up their plans and privately doing whatever. And then they come here and they go, here's our plan for how we can erect, redo the seawall. Fine, but you can't then, all five of you can't just drive over there and go, that looks great, and then nobody from the public is seeing what's happening, and then later on it's presented to the council, which they did that. I'm not sure why they did that, but so that's basically what happened in that case. Then here's another case where I just wanted to mention where a private non-governmental entity, as a gratuitous gesture, said, hey, we'll work with you, County Commission, to change your zoning code. And then the Attorney General said, those meetings, that's fine, that's perfectly fine. You want to volunteer to help, no problem. But you have to follow the Sunshine Law requirements when you're having your meetings.
But it was because the commission was invited.
Yes.
But if they had meetings within their company, they don't,
No problem at all.
Right.
Yes, no problem. You're still private, you don't have to worry, you haven't lost your privacy rights, everything's fine. Okay, so there are exemptions. Everything's not, we are transparent and we are open, but not every single thing is open to the Sunshine Law. So you have attorney-client sessions, meaning sometimes we'll meet with staff, we'll meet with a manager, we'll meet with a counsel, and those things are exempt. We do collective bargaining sessions, so when we have the union, like the fire union, for example, and we're negotiating the terms and conditions of their employment with the village, we'll meet separately with the manager and then staff, maybe the fire chief or whoever he designates, to discuss strategy. Those are not open to the public. Makes sense, right? Because if you're negotiating, and imagine if we sat down and did our strategy session in front of everyone, they'd have the upper hand. There would be no point in negotiations because they would already know what we're thinking, okay? So it only applies, though, in the context of when we have actual and impending collective bargaining negotiations. So like right now, for example, that wouldn't be the case because we're not in collective bargaining. We will be. We're probably, in a couple months, we'll start collective bargaining, and then this will apply. Those discussions are not going to be open to the public. Penalties, which we have to talk about. These are the same penalties, by the way, when we do public records. I'll try to get through that so I can get volley over to Roger, because who I know is like patiently waiting for his turn. And I also don't want to keep you here for longer than you have to be. But so the penalties are, if it's intentional, okay, this is the key word. So if you did it on purpose, it's subject to up to 60 days in jail, a $500 fine. If it's unintentional, so you literally didn't know, which is 99.999% of the time, people don't know. They don't realize they're violating the law. It's non-criminal, and then you have a fine up to $500, okay? So it's not a criminal. It's not going to be investigated and result in a jail term. Okay, so do we have any questions or anything? I hear like somebody's talking, so I don't know if there's a question there. Okay, any questions here? Okay, oh, yes, Patrick.
Does the Sunshine Act have a FOIA component to it, or is that a sort of a separate entity that you go through to request documents from internal departments within a government organization?
Okay, so that's a great question because that's the next topic we're going to talk about. So you asked about the FOIA, which is like the federal counterpart to what we're going to talk about. Mm-hmm. The FOIA is the Freedom of Information Act that applies to federal agencies. We have the exact same thing with the state, and it's the Public Records Law. Lots of people say Chapter 119, you throw that out there, but it's just the Public Records Law. It's the same thing. It's going to talk about requesting records, what records are public, that sort of thing. So that's what the very next topic is so you're right on the money. The next topic is public records. And it's very important because you're dealing with lots of records all the time. They're emailed to you, they're given to you sometimes at this meeting, just handed out to you, and you need to know what those records really mean and how to deal with them. So that's a good question. So the next one is public records. It should be the very next slide, should be that one. Let's see. Am I up? Okay, there. Okay, there we go. All right, so public record. So what is a public record? So all documents, papers, letters, maps, books, tapes, photographs, films, all of these things, regardless, you see it underlined, regardless of the physical form that's either made or received pursuant to law or ordinance in connection with the transaction of official city business. So anything in any form that it takes, like I said, the emails, all of that, if it's made or received in connection with village business, that's going to be a public record. And we're going to talk about things like exceptions. We're going to talk about examples to kind of give you a more concrete understanding of what we mean when we say public record. So again, cases explaining public records and that these things are made in connection with village business, city business. The last bullet point is important. if you have a question, if there is doubt, I don't know if this is a public record or not, the law favors giving it. Remember, openness and transparency, because the idea is that the people pay for government. The people pay for everything. The people pay for this table, these microphones, this clicker that's in my hand. So you don't want to have the people feeling as though they're paying for these things, but we're hiding. We're hiding things from them, but we're taking their money. You want them to know we're taking your money, and look at all the great things we're doing with your money, right? So this clicker helps me to do things, that are important to the operations of the village. So that's the idea behind it. So openness and transparency. So whenever an issue comes up, is this a public record? I'm not sure. In favor of giving the document that's being requested. Same thing again. So I'm just showing you all the authority, legal authority that's out there saying made or received in connection with village business, made or received in connection with village business. You should turn it over. I wanted to comment on social media before we go into the question and answer portion. When you're posting messages on social media regarding village business, bear in mind those things are still public record as well. So when you're putting up things like, a flyer about a village event, or even a picture of an event that you went to, those things pertain to village business. So be very, very aware of that's going to still constitute a public record, right? So theoretically, somebody could ask for that and say, well, that's a public record. It pertains to village business, and give me a copy of that picture, or give me a copy of that flyer. So text messages, same thing. When text messages first became popular, the thought was they're transitory, they're not really public record. And then that changed because the Attorney General said, no, remember the statute says regardless of form. So that statute was way before text messages, but it does say regardless of form. So whether it's a text message or any other forum, social media, Facebook, Instagram, I've lost count of all the different ones they have, it's still a public record. You cannot use any mechanism that's going to evade being able to give that to somebody. And cities have been fined for not being able to turn things over, right? So one of the issues with text messages, why text messages can be tricky, especially when you serve on a board that's public, is that a lot of those phone companies like T-Mobile, AT&T, they only store them for a certain period of time. So if you don't store them, a lot of people don't have a lot of people are just not going to save their text messages. In fact, a lot of people delete them, to be quite honest with you. I think I delete mine sometimes as well when my phone is just overloaded with text. But if you delete your text messages and it pertains to something like that we're doing here and someone comes and asks for it, that's a problem because you should retain it. And a lot of those companies like T-Mobile and AT&T do not save it for longer. Sometimes it's 30 days. Sometimes it may be even 2 years, but it could be somebody asked for it way after that, 3 years later, 4 years later, 5 years later, and it's gone. So just bear in mind if that's the case. There are ways to archive your text messages. I'm not super tech savvy, so I can't give you any advice on that. But there are ways to save them somehow in a repository so you have it. Same thing with like your Facebook messages or Twitter and other social media outlets. There are ways to archive those things so you have them if they pertain to village business. But just keep that in mind because if you're deleting them and they pertain to village business, that's an issue if somebody asks for it. If you get lucky and nobody asks for it, it's okay, but somebody could ask you for it, and if you can't produce it, that's an issue. Okay, so the access requirements under, like I said, Chapter 119 is what it's called, is that everyone who has custody of a public record, everyone who has custody, which is, so you see my hand movement, which is all of you here, actually this table here, everyone who has custody, should be providing access if somebody's requesting it at a reasonable time, under reasonable conditions. So we do have a custodian of records, right, who's the clerk, who's the village clerk. But if somebody were to ask, it's like for something from the LPA, you would have to provide that to the clerk, and then the clerk would provide it to the requester. I underlined the at a reasonable time, under reasonable conditions, because you can't say, let's say a requester called the clerk and said, I work every single day. I can only get there at, I have to get there, the clerk goes from 8 to 5. I can only get there at 8 o'clock. You can't say, well, I'm only available at lunchtime, because then you're frustrating that person's opportunity to get the records. You have to work around and with the person's schedule. You can't do things that make it seem as though you're being difficult to that person so they won't get the record. So again, there's a duty of disclosure and there's a duty of retention. There are two things. You need to retain them, like we talked about the text messages, figure out a way to retain them, and then also produce them once they're requested, okay? So the records custodian here, normally we have a system where the clerk will acknowledge the request in good faith, promptly respond, and the law says you have a reasonable period of time to respond to public records requests. So if you're sitting right now, somebody comes up to you and says, I want, let's say Deb's agenda that she's looking at, I want a copy of that right now. If somebody came to you right now and said, I need a copy of that. Let's say we're on a break and they come up to you and say, I need a copy of that. How would you respond to that? I have a reasonable period of time. You see that I have no access to a copier right here, but I promise you, the moment that we can, you'll get it. Perfectly fine. A lot of times, people get so frazzled and think they have to give it to the person, they'll give away their only copy. No, you have a reasonable period of time. The law is very intentional in not defining what reasonable period of time means because it's different for everything. I had one where somebody asked for, the city I was representing had been incorporated in 1950. And this was in maybe 2019. The person wanted all the emails that pertain to incorporation. I don't know when that's going to... we said, sure, no problem. But that's going to take a reasonable period of time, which is going to be open to interpretation because I'm not really sure. We have to do some research and figure it out. Right? So you have a reasonable period of time, even if it's just that one sheet of paper that's on your desk right there. Because the person would say to you, well, you have it right there. You could just give it to me. No, I'll get you a copy in a reasonable period of time. Nothing illegal about that. All right, so the custodian is the person who has supervision or control over the document. They have a legal responsibility for its care and for its keeping. They can always designate another person. When I do public records policies, and I think I drafted the one for here, or redrafted it, modified it, I had a person named as the designated alternate, because there has to be somebody if the clerk is on vacation or she's not here. So usually we identify that person to the requester. So reasonable conditions, again, you don't want to do anything that's going to frustrate somebody's ability to get the document, whether they want to inspect it or they want to copy it. You can impose, so when we talk about reasonable conditions, you can impose some reasonable regulations, right, to prevent somebody from destroying your records. So usually when this comes into place is when somebody asks to inspect records. So many times people don't know what they're looking for. So they'll say, can I look at it? Like, can I look at this person's personnel file? I think there might be something in there, but I don't know for sure, and I don't want to pay for the whole file. What if this person's been here for 20 years? The file is this big, and we charge you per page. So they say, can I come and inspect it? Absolutely. But we can put measures in place for when that person is inspecting it because, believe it or not, what has happened is the person will go through the file. Oh, I found it. They just take it, and they're gone with it. Those are records that we cannot replicate, and they're just gone, right? And you can't really prove that the person took it. It was there before they came, and then it wasn't there, but then you're sort of accusing somebody without real hard evidence. So you can put someone there, which what we normally do is you can inspect it, but somebody will watch them as they're going through the file. And then you flag for us what you want, and we'll give you a copy, and you pay for it, and you're on your merry way. But we don't sort of leave the person there alone, because it literally has happened. You may not believe it, but it's true, where people have just taken records, public records, and gone. So some of the other things that the law says that you cannot do, you can't ask people to enter a code. We'll put this code in, and then you can get access to the entry. Everything has to be easy. Don't give them arbitrary reviewing hours, like after hours, when it's late, or they should be home with their families. Can't request identification. We're going to talk about that, but you can't say, give me your license, give me your birth certificate, none of those things. And you also cannot have a requirement that somebody requesting a public record has to complete a form first. You can ask, you can say, we have a form that will make it easy for you to follow, where your request is and for us to enter the information in the system, but it cannot be mandatory. We're going to talk about those things, okay? Just stick a thumbtack in that for right now until we explore it further down. And I'm trying to wrap up so that Roger can get in, but we have some questions. So if records are requested, do they have to be immediately turned over? We talked about that, right? With even one sheet of paper that's there. No, they don't. And most times they're not even asking for one sheet of paper. Most times they're asking for many sheets of paper, right? So you can't unnecessarily delay production, but you certainly don't have to jump out of your skin because somebody comes and says, give me the paper. Can the village require prepayment before turning over public records? So can we as a village say, we're estimating how much this is going to cost. Here's what you have to pay us. Once we get the check from you, we'll be happy to turn over the records to you. You think yes? Let's see what the answer is. Yes, prepayment is authorized. The next question we're going to talk about is why would we want prepayment? If yes, we can do it, which is true, law says we can, why would we want to do it? All the time. All the time. So there's one city I represented, and every time I would go there, they would show me, they would go, there's Mr. Williams' stack. It was a stack from the floor up to about here. You know how much staff time and effort that took? They're responding to his request, right? They're doing the right thing. That's what you're supposed to do. Don't unreasonably delay. Transparent, transparent, transparent. But you put all that together, and then guess what? Mr. Williams doesn't care anymore. I moved on to something else. He's not thinking what's going on the back end. When I put that paper in, they're really taking it seriously, and they're really working on this. Staff has to stop what they're doing. So let's say it's the building department. They have to stop what they're doing for the rest of the village to address his concerns. And then he just decides, just because he doesn't have to take them, just says, I don't feel like taking them. So it's secure, because when you have some skin in the game, you're going to come back for those records. If I've paid you my money, you're not a charity, I'm going to come get my records. So it really helps a lot. When somebody prepays, it almost guarantees that they're going to come for their records. It's very unusual to have somebody not pick them up, especially if it's a voluminous records request. Let them prepay. They'll come. You know your work will not be in vain. Can you charge administrative costs for compiling records requested as part of a public records request? Now, I'll explain that a little bit, what I mean by that. So remember I told you that we charge for copying, right? That's very standard. I think we may charge like 25 cents per page or something. It's been the same everywhere for a long, long time. But administrative costs are costs, for example, like IT. Let's say they're asking for emails. So sometimes, not sometimes, all the time, just to make sure that you're as expansive as possible and you're getting all the records this person is requesting, you don't just ask, let's say they said, we want all the emails between Deb and Patrick on this issue, right? In case you exchange, they're trying to say you're violating the Sunshine Law, so they're asking for those records, right? To make sure that we're getting the information, if you had a village email address, we would get IT involved. We would say, IT, can you do a search? Because your emails are not private, right? You only have a reasonable expectation of privacy. That's another training topic. But so they can look. IT can look. IT can audit your emails and see, have they talked about this topic? That's the time that IT is spending on that. So that's administrative time. Can we charge, so outside of the copying, just regular copying costs, can we charge administrative costs for putting those records together responsive to that request?
Yes, but I think there's a starting limit.
Yes. So yes, we can and we should, because again, remember what I told you. You're literally stopping what you're doing, your regular business, to do this thing. And sometimes it takes a long time. So we have them keep track of their time. I spent 10 hours, I spent 100 hours, I spent 1 hour, I spent whatever it was, and you can charge that. You have to charge the lowest rate. The person with the lowest rate in that department is what you would charge. So even if the IT director did it, you're not going to charge, the IT director probably makes way more than like an entry-level person, so you would charge the entry-level rate. But you could charge, and you should, like I said. So generally, there's a 30-minute rule is okay. So once they've spent more than 30 minutes, you can charge for that time. So if IT gets involved, but they just did a search and like it just a quick boom, oh, no, I didn't find anything, we're not going to charge you for that. But if it's taking them more than 30 minutes to put it together, then we'll charge a fee. We'll have them keep track of their time. Okay, does a requester have to state that he or she is making a public records request? Now, what I mean by that is, let's say I came to the village and I wanted some public records. I wanted some any suggested amendments to the comprehensive plan. And do I have to say, my name is Allison Smith, and I want to make a public records request for any changes to the comprehensive plan?
No.
There is no magic term. There are no magic words, and you never have to use the term public records request. If they are requesting a document that was made or received in connection with village business, they're making a public records request. So a lot of times, and I can't tell you how many times I've had this with staff all over the state of Florida who've said to me, I didn't know they were making a public records request. They just asked for a map. It's a public record, so it's a public records request, okay? So we have to go on the exact same formula that we go every time with these requests. Can someone who's requesting records request, can the village, sorry, I skipped over to the next one. Can the village request or mandate that a requester sign in when they're requesting public records? Can we have a sign-in sheet for when people, like if somebody goes to Marnie or...
No.
No. Okay, there is no sign-in. I went to a city once and they told me, sure, you can do it. Here's our form. Fill this out. And I said, is your attorney close by? Can I talk to your attorney? He said, you cannot do that. And they didn't know. And this is a huge city. You would know which city I'm talking about. And they changed the policy because I said, I'm not here trying to get you in trouble. I'm just advising you on what you need to do, and your attorney should really be advising you on that. But if I were somebody trying to get you in trouble, you would be in trouble because you can't ask me that to sign in. What about the requester asking to remain anonymous? Can somebody requesting a public record ask to remain anonymous?
Yes.
So I hear some yeses. So for the people saying yes, my question to you is, if someone wants to remain anonymous, how do we get them their record? How would we get the record to them if they say, I don't want to be identified? What do you think we do? Any creative ideas?
Yeah, use false name, pseudonym.
So you can ask to be anonymous, and a lot of times people do want to be anonymous. Sometimes, for example, a media house doesn't want to be named because they're doing a story. So if they say I'm from Channel 7, all of a sudden there will be so much discussion internally. Channel 7 wants these records. I wonder what this could mean. And then you break their story just totally loses its life because now you know. So sometimes they want to be anonymous. You can say to the person says, I want to remain anonymous. Okay, how would you like to be contacted? You can do that. Or number two, just as you suggested, a lot of cities, and I think we've implemented the same thing, use a numerical system. So let's say if you came and you said, I want to request a copy of this map. They would say, all right, we're going to assign that number 630. Whenever you call about your request, I will ask you, what number are you? And you tell me I'm number 630. In their system, as soon as they enter 630, it will pop up with, wanted a copy of the map of Founders Park. And then they'll be able to provide that to you. They'll ask you, how would you like to be contacted? You can say, I'll contact you. Don't worry about contacting me. I'll contact you. About how long do you think it will take? Call us back in about a week and I'll tell you the progress that we've made. And so that's how you kind of have that dialogue. So they can remain anonymous. Sometimes people create sort of like dummy emails, like smokythebandit@gmail.com. Just email me there, right? So because for whatever reason they don't want to be known, and that's okay, that's fine, right? So yes, a requester can remain anonymous. They don't have to identify themselves. Does a person have to make a public records request in person? No, there's so many avenues to make a public records request, and you can do it over the phone and by fax, if you still have a fax machine. You can do it by email, all sorts of different ways. Does a person have to provide a reason as to why they want a public record? No. And do you know that staff, not staff here, but do you know that staff throughout the different municipalities ask people all the time, why? None of your business why, right? So they don't have to tell you why. It's not important. It's a public record. I want it. Even if I want to frame it and hang it on my wall, that's my prerogative. Don't need to tell you why. If a person asks to inspect a record, can the village produce the record instead of allowing the person to inspect it? So somebody wants to look at the personnel file, just look, inspect, just look at it. Can you say, you know what, it's easier for me to just copy this and give it to you? What do we think? No, if they want to inspect it, they should be allowed to inspect it. They don't have to copy it, because again, they might just be looking for one page, one piece of paper, and you're going to give them 500 pages, and now they have to like figure out where things are, and then you're going to charge them for 500 pages, and they only want one. So if they say, I just want to look, then you allow them to look, and you follow the requirements. Make sure it's a reasonable conditions, reasonable time. You're not unduly delaying the production of the documents, all of those things. Is a person limited in the amount of public records requests that he or she can make? I call them repeat customers. So I was a city attorney for a long time, and literally you would see the name and you would know, what are we asking for this time? Because it would be just people who spent a lot of time submitting records requests to the city. And so there are repeat customers. So what can we say? You know, you've made, today is Friday, this is your 50th public records request. So we produce it in a reasonable time, but can we say you're limited? Now you've reached your quota of how many requests you can make.
No.
I know we wish sometimes that we could.
There's a desire to do that, but
I know we wish sometimes that we could, but unfortunately we can't. And you know, for the attorneys in the room and on the phone, I think that's a little bit counterintuitive sometimes, because like in litigation, for example, as an attorney, one of the things that we say is like, this is a duplicate request. You've asked for this before. And we do things like when somebody is requesting discovery, like information from us in furtherance of prosecuting their lawsuit, we'll say, this is overbroad, this is vague, this is unduly you're asking us for so many records. One of the terms we use is, this is unduly burdensome. Like if somebody wrote to me in litigation and said, I want all those emails from the date of incorporation, I wouldn't give it to you. I would literally write, this is unduly burdensome. The end. You're not getting it. We can't do that. We cannot do that. So how we deal with that is that we say, not a problem, but you will be prepaying us. We're going to estimate how long that's going to take. And if it's $2,000, $3,000, when I get that check, we'll get started on that thing for you, right? So we can't tell them no, but we manage it other ways, okay? We love our repeat customers just like everybody else.
What if someone is intentionally making a request to impede the progress of the government?
That's a great question. Even in those situations, we cannot, there's no objection at all that we can make. We still have to work on the records, but again, we manage it with fine. You want to do, and sometimes I will tell you this as well. Let's say in the beginning, there's some cities that are very charitable, so they will not charge. They won't charge administrative costs. They won't charge copies. They just give you. You come in, you request it, they give you. Those cities, when there's a repeat customer, the charge kicks in after a while. After they start constant requests, they start charging. It does have the effect of having that person slow down the request because you're paying a lot of money. It starts adding up because now you're making all the requests and now the city says, okay, we were being nice in the beginning, but now we have to tighten our reins because now you're impeding the progress of, we can't do any village operations because every single day something's coming in.
You can't charge one person and not charge the other person.
You have to be consistent. So there are cities that that will say, nope, we were not going to charge. And then when that person starts with a constant barrage of requests, then they charge. My cities that I represent, all of them charge. They all charge everybody for everything, whether it's administrative costs or copying or what have you. So that's pretty much how it works. And normally there's a policy. We have a policy here. It's a pretty robust policy, but it addresses pretty much every concern that could come up. All right, so, and I kind of gave away the answer to this one. Can we object as a village to say that something's overly broad? You're seeking too many documents. No, right? Like I said, like in litigation, this is such a typical response in litigation. It's overly broad, we're not giving it to you. I've used that, tens of thousands probably of times I've said that and have no problem with a judge saying, you're right, it's too broad. Tell her what you actually want. You're going, having her look through all these papers. What do you actually want? We can't do that. What we can do, though, can you ask for somebody to clarify their request?
Yes.
Yes. Sometimes people make requests that are so difficult to understand. You have to reach out to them and say, what do you actually mean by this? I really want to work on your request and respond to it, but they'll use a term, for example, that we don't use. Like I had one where somebody was asking for a particular report. The city didn't do that report, but they didn't know the name of what they wanted. So the more we talked, the more I said, oh, you're looking for this other report, and then they got that. So you can certainly ask for clarification. You can't say no, but you can ask them to clarify what they mean. And that's normally very helpful, because sometimes they don't actually know how to say what they want. All right, so just some best practices that I'll run through, and then I'll turn it over to Roger, who's not going to keep you here very long. His presentation is much shorter than mine, so don't worry. Okay, so the best practices is that you have a uniform procedure. How do you handle records requests? We have one, like I said. The person that's designated as your custodian needs to be identified. Here, it's our clerk. She has an alternate when she's not available. We acknowledge the receipt of every public records request. It's not a big, long thing. It's not a dissertation. It's just telling the requester, we've gotten it. We're going to work on it. Here's your number. And that's the second bullet point there. Consider using a numbering system. I usually tell cities to do that. We do that. And make sure that they are reviewed. All those records are reviewed, because there is exempt information. Like sometimes there's social security numbers on documents. Those are exempt. You know, we'll get in big trouble if we release somebody's social security number, which has happened, not here, but it has happened in other cities, okay? So you want to be helpful, and you don't want to unduly delay document production. Just remember that for public records. So
You take all your medicine?
yes, I took all my medicine. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. All right, so let's go back to
Cheryl, you need to put your mic on mute, please.
Don't you love Zoom? I love Zoom. Okay, so back to Sunshine Law, just to wrap everything up in a nice, neat bow. The one thing I really wanted you to take away was, for Sunshine Law, 2 or more are gathered, okay? 2 or more of you. Don't need a quorum, just 2 or more. 3 things, open to the public, minutes, and? Yes, perfect, the 3 things, okay? And then public records, everything that you're looking at there, all public. If somebody comes up to you, demands, no requirement to produce it to them right away. Reasonable period of time to produce the records. Our clerk is our records custodian. We can charge for administrative time, and don't unduly delay production.
So public records is also, people can request any documents, any forms, whatever, but it doesn't create a new document.
Yes, so that's another point too as well. So if a record does not exist, if somebody's asking you for something, like they say, I would like to see a chart that shows all the businesses that have been developed in the village for the last year. If we don't have that chart, we just say, no such records exist. There's no, and the law actually says very clearly, there is no requirement to create a document that doesn't exist. And cities do it all the time. So that will come in, and somebody will literally sit there and put together all the pieces of information and create an Excel chart. Now you have created a public record. So now you have to produce that. But if it didn't exist before, you don't have to put it together. No requirement to do that. Okay? So that's pretty much the long and short of my presentation.
Can I ask a question about public records?
Yes, of course.
If somebody approaches one of the board members at a meeting and asks for a public record, is it appropriate for them to refer them to the village clerk?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay, so this is how you handle it. If somebody comes to you at a public meeting and says, hey, I know you guys were discussing this item regarding Winn-Dixie. I really wanted to take a look at something that you guys were looking at here. You say, okay, make a note of it to yourself. Roger Smith wants a copy of XYZ, and then you go and say, okay, all right, how do you want me to get it to you? How do you want the village to get it to you? And you take down that information. You are just the conduit of that information. You're just taking it and passing it to the clerk. Let her know that this person asked for it. You don't send them to the clerk, though. Yes, I know you have a puzzled look on your face because the clerk is the custodian, but you want to make sure that you don't turn away people when they come to you, or because one of the ideas is that it's thought that that's also frustrating their ability to get the public record. It's telling them, no, you have to go to Village Hall, or no, you have to call into Village Hall. You're the village right now, is how it's perceived, right? You're the village. So they're giving you the request. All you're doing is taking it, passing it forward. You have no further obligation outside of that, just to pass the information forward.
And just to note, we have a new software for public records requests. It went live today, so people can request public records on our website 24 hours a day now.
Oh, Marnie's going to be very busy. Okay. All right. So any other questions before Roger takes over?
Can you explain that software a hair farther? It's just the request of the public, or they can search more themselves?
So it's the requests for public records and lien searches. Once the record is not created, because they're not creating a new record, but once the search is created and given, they create like a like a storage of all the ones that have already been done, so that if somebody asks for that same thing again, you can search for what's already been done. Do you know what I mean? So you can't just search village records in general, but if somebody came and said, I want, everything related to T-table key that the LPA reviewed on their last meeting, and the clerk provided that information, they would have that in a storage area on their website, and so somebody could go there before they requested it again, do a search for T-table key, and that would pop up so they could see that and see if they still needed to do another records request.
So it could cut down public records requests because of it's picking up the already requested stuff and making it available.
Potentially, it's right now, I just tried to do a search.
Right.
There's nothing in it right now because it just went live today, so there's nothing in it, but potentially over time, it could build up quite a cache, I guess.
It is difficult when they have to reproduce the same thing over and over, and people do ask the same thing over and over and over, and Marnie has to, yes, if it's already there, it's just print, here you go.
Certainly in the real estate industry where there are some agents who actually make public requests prior to working with a client.
Wow.
And others don't, but a lot of us do. So that would be nice to have it actually there in case somebody else already made that request. Or if I made it once and need to do it again.
So I think, so the next presentation is not loaded yet, I don't think. Yes. They're two separate presentations.
Oh, good evening, everyone, again. My name is Roger Poe. Before we get into the land use discussion, which is fun, substantive, and very pertinent to your duties as local planning agency board members, I just wanted to add on to Allison's presentation, reemphasizing that as it comes to sunshine law, form does not trump substance. Substance is what controls when you're dealing with two members of the public. And then a really useful piece of information that is always harped on at our firm, right? Relating to public records. It's my guiding star, right? And this is particularly important, I think, when we're feeling emotional. Assume that everything that you do as a local planning agency board member is going to be featured on the front page of the New York Times, the Miami Herald, whatever newspaper of circulation that you prefer. And if the answer to, am I okay with that being on the newspaper, is no, don't create the record, because you're not required to create a record. So when one of you goes home and says, I can't believe how board member X voted on X, just don't hit send on anything. Wait until tomorrow. And say it in person, if anything. Anyway, so today, again, my name is Roger Poe. I am a Florida State undergrad. I went to FIU Law for law school. I am with John Quick at the Village Attorney's Office with Weiss Serota. I am a Miami native, but I love fishing in the Keys, and I love coming down to the Keys. So it's been a pleasure to see all of you, and I'm hoping to see you all a lot more often moving forward. So, real quick. It says quasi-judicial hearing laws, but it's actually, we're actually going to be going over land use in general today. Oh, is that what it is? Here. Yeah. There we go. Okay.
It has a magic touch.
So, the local planning agency is an advisory board. It's an advisory board specifically that's required by the state of Florida under section 163, 3174 of the Florida statutes. And it is created by the village council. Some villages and municipalities will designate themselves as a local planning agency, but in Islamorada, we have obviously have this wonderful group of advisory board members, and you're really tasked with a couple of duties by state law, but also a couple of duties under the village's own code. So the primary functions, your guiding star, your primary purpose here is going to be coming, obviously, from the Florida statutes, right? And they're here, written for you, which is to make recommendations to the village council regarding the adoption of any comprehensive plan amendment, to monitor and oversee the effectiveness of a comprehensive plan and particular amendments to the comprehensive plan. And then the third primary function is going to be to review land development regulations, land development codes, and amendments to the land development regulations or land development codes. Now, I remember my first time hearing some of these. For anyone who isn't familiar with these, I know it's arcane, but I'll explain what the land development code, the land development regulations, and the comprehensive plan are pretty shortly. Most importantly, and this is, I think, where the LPA comes into play, that fourth bullet under the Florida statutes allows the village council to place other responsibilities on this local planning agencies. There we go. And we certainly have in Islamorada. You'll notice that the first three are very similar to the statutory requirements that were imposed by the Florida legislature, right? You're here to review, and make recommendations to the village council regarding the adoption of or amendments to the comprehensive plan. You're here to monitor and oversee the effectiveness of the comprehensive plan and any amendments to the comprehensive plan. You're here to review and make recommendations to the village council regarding any amendments to the land development regulations and changes to our official zoning map. The village council has also added on here consistency of any regulations and changes with the comprehensive plan. That's going to be vital. And then the last two sections, which are very Islamorada specific, is making special knowledge and expertise available upon written request from the village council. So you may have that as an advisory board function to draw on your expertise as individual board members and your professions and provide recommendations to the village council. Again, this is if the village council so requests, of course. And then the last one, and I want to be real clear, it sounds pretty broad, but it's pretty limited, is adopting such rules of procedure as is necessary to administer your responsibilities. Allison sort of touched upon that a little bit. For example, public comment, setting the amount of time for each member of the public to speak. Those are the sort of administrative procedures that you are allowed to adopt. They can't counter the village code, of course, but in general, you do have some leeway in establishing some administrative procedures in how your meetings go. Any questions up until now? Pretty good. All right. Perfect. All righty.
Actually,
Yeah, go ahead.
kind of. I had a question, comment. So in the past, it's been that whatever the village has adopted in terms of administrative things is what we run on here.
Yep.
That seems to say that we could change what we do here.
We would have to look at the particular rule that you would want to amend and make sure that it doesn't contradict a village code provision that may explain why what we do here also happens at the village council level.
Not that I had anything particular in mind. I just
And by the way, I suspect that today a lot of those type of, well, I'm not sure that I have any example that I want to ask about in particular, because we're going to be talking about very broad level information. But we are always here, obviously, from the village attorney's office, if an issue comes up and you have a question about it. So if you have that nagging procedural question later down the line, let me know, and we'll be happy to address it. Some really general rules of how this local planning agency should work. We are required to have a quorum before voting on anything. A simple majority of the LPA is what's necessary in order to have a quorum. The quorum must be in person, though we can have virtual participation as long as there's an in-person quorum. So a majority of you must be in person. All actions have to be by simple majority of those that are attending the meeting. So if there's 4 of you, that would mean 3, right? If there's a tie in any vote, that is a rejection. Meetings are scheduled by our lovely planning director, and usually any items will be postponed to a next meeting, regularly scheduled meeting, unless the reason for the movement of the item is due to not having quorum. All right. Alrighty. So what is the Village Comprehensive Plan? I've been mentioning it quite a bit. I want you to think of the Village Comprehensive Plan almost like your local constitution for land use matters, right? Everything that we do in the land use and zoning arena in the village of Islamorada must adhere to our comprehensive plan. An interesting analogy would be all of our code of ordinances provisions have to adhere to our village charter. Well, similarly here, our zoning land development regulations, our zoning code amendments, our comprehensive plan amendments must all be consistent with that with the comprehensive plan overall. So with that idea in your mind that the comprehensive plan is our constitution, it follows, right, that the comprehensive plan provides our principles, our guidelines, our standards and strategies for orderly, balanced, future economic, social, physical, environmental, and fiscal development in the village. The comprehensive plan should guide all of our decisions in the village, our programs, our activities, land development regulations, everything. So everything that we do in the village has to be, in a land use context, has to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan is really various elements, right? And I'm just listing a couple here because there are quite a few. But the comprehensive plan dictates everything from our future land use element to transportation elements, housing elements, coastal management elements, conservation elements, affordable housing elements. There's a plethora of elements in our comprehensive plan that dictates how our village is going to grow in an orderly, wise manner. Obviously, as the local planning agency, the single most important element is going to be the future land use element. And that future land use element can be broken down into 2 subcategories: the future land use goals, objectives, and implementing policies, and our future land use map. Again, that doesn't mean that the comprehensive plan's other elements aren't important. I'm just noting that a lot of the decisions that you make here are going to first focus on that future land use element and then look at other aspects such as transportation, housing, conservation, etc. But this sort of begs the question, well, what are these 2 elements? The first element here is our comprehensive plan, future land use goals, objectives, and implementing policies. There are multiple policies in place. I'm providing one example here, which is our land use and zoning decision framework. You can see here that the comprehensive plan calls for the direction of development only to sites that can accommodate such activity without promoting conflict with natural resources, just pulling out some as examples, keeps development away from our shorelines and wetlands, ensures that character and location of land uses incorporate best management practices and principles of resource conservation, promotes orderly land use transition, and minimizes threats to the health, safety, and welfare. Right? These are just some examples. Again, there are numerous policies, goals, objectives that will come up on a case-by-case basis because every single development and every single ordinance that amends our land development regulations is going to be different. And one might call into play our transportation element more than another. One might call into play our conservation element. So just keep that in mind. Any questions up until now? Good? All right. Now, my favorite portion is, of course, the comprehensive plan's future land use map. Now, if you are a visual person like me, and you can find this online, by the way, on our GIS systems, seeing this visually helps us understand how the village is formed, how it works, right? The comprehensive plan sets forth the category of uses that are intended for a particular area, and the intensity and density of those uses. So, for example, you will see broad land use categories such as residential low, residential high, industrial, conservation, public, semi-public. These are broad categories. You'll notice here that you're not going into fourplexes and duplexes and condominium zoning districts, right? That is separate. This only guides generally how a particular piece of land should broadly fall, or the type of use that should broadly fall for a piece of land, and the intensity and density for that land. Strongly recommend that everyone here take a look at the GIS app if you haven't, and take a look at our overall comprehensive plan categories, intensities, and densities. Now, in contrast to our comprehensive plan, we have our actual zoning code, our zoning land development regulations. That is Chapter 30. You can access our code and the entire comprehensive plan, of course, on MuniCode. I strongly suggest that you do. And our zoning code is not like our Constitution. Our zoning code is the nitty-gritty. This is what provides the design standards, the actual nuts and bolts of how land will operate, what regulates our land, etc. So, for example, I pulled out some important provisions in Chapter 30 that are particularly of note, right? This is where we find our development and review process, our infamous and very unique building permit allocation system, which is the only one in Florida. Of course, Article 5, the Schedule of District Use and Development Standards, that's vital. That gives us all of our zoning districts. And those zoning districts will have in them our setback requirements, the densities, the height of the buildings that must adhere, the green space requirements. We're talking about granular detail that is found in the actual land development regulations. And our land development regulations must comply and be consistent with our comprehensive plan, just to sort of go back full circle. Alrighty, and again, similar to our comprehensive plan future land use map, we have a zoning map. But you'll notice that here, and it's a little bit more visual, right? There's a long list of zoning districts. That long list of zoning districts may fall within a category in the future land use map, and that zoning district must comply in its regulations with the comprehensive plan's future land use designation. So you may find different zoning districts within a particular future land use map designation, but you won't find, overlaps that are, inconsistent with each other. And again, this map, like the future land use map, can be found on our GIS website, and I strongly encourage you to look at it just because I feel that it really does get you to think of the way our land use works in a different manner. So again, we've been touching on it all meeting long, but the difference between land use and zoning, future land use designations, so that's the comprehensive plan, indicates the intended use category and the development density and intensity for a particular area. We're talking broad goals. The zoning code, and more specifically zoning districts, provide definite allowable uses, the design and development guidelines that will govern an intended use. And again, the last bullet is the most important. No zoning district can be allowed for an area if it conflicts with the future land use designation for that area. A zoning district cannot conflict with our comprehensive plan. That's our constitution there. Of course, it's much easier to amend, but that's neither here nor there. All righty. All right, so again, just to reemphasize it, the future land use map provides a bird's eye view of development in the village, provides broad categories representing types of land use, and it's used for land management. This is what's guiding how we grow. The zoning map provides this ground level view. This is you in front of the cafe, you in front of your single family home. This is the actual use that we're doing. These are the setbacks that are required. Here's why I can have a pool as an accessory use. Here's why I can only have one family in this zoning district. Here's why I can have a bicycle shop in this district. These are the ground level regulations. And it's all per property by property. Okay, so I will end there, but I did want to give a couple of hypotheticals. So typically, as a local planning agency, your job is to make recommendations to the village council after considering a staff report that is going to be developed by your director on either a land development regulation amendment, so that would be a regulation, let's say, to pool regulations, or to a zoning district, those regulations, and you'll analyze the proposed amendment and compare it to our comprehensive plan. You'll look through the different policies, the land use designation requirements, and make sure that they're consistent. And based on that, you'll make a recommendation to the village council whether to approve, disapprove, or approve with, certain modifications, a proposed ordinance or, a comprehensive plan amendment. So, a couple of hypotheticals just to sort of put this in perspective. And again, this is all case by case, which is why it's not great to show, but let's suppose that our planning director has gone insane and no, we're nowhere near. We're nowhere near that. She had an incident. Let's just say she had an incident with a bicyclist, and she's really mad at the bicyclist. And in the mixed use category, or in a mixed use category, zoning district wants to ban bicycle parking. Would that be allowed? Well, if you look at our comprehensive plan, you will notice that in our mixed use land use designation, one of the primary goals is actually to facilitate pedestrian and bicycle safety and use. So land development regulation that prohibits bicycle parking in a zoning district that's designated for the mixed use would not be consistent with our comprehensive plan. So you would say, Village Council, we recommend denial because it's in conflict with policy X, Y, Z. Okay, another hypothetical. Let's, in our industrial land use designation, let's suppose that we have a residential zoning district and someone wants to, or there's a proposal to add bicycle repair usage in a residential district. Would that be consistent? Probably not, because, or not probably not, it definitely wouldn't be consistent, because if you look at the residential zoning district, it's going to fall within the industrial use, or within the residential, low residential use district. And if you look at the policies there, it's going to say industrial uses aren't allowed. Okay, that's a really obvious one, but what about an automotive manufacturing district, right? We got Toyota, and they want to bring jobs to Isla Morada. And they actually want to propose this, a change to our industrial zoning district on a piece of property that is industrial use in the comp plan. Would that be an ordinance that could survive? And it's kind of tricky. It sounds like it might, except if you look at our comp plan, we do not allow heavy industrial uses. That's not something that would be consistent with our comprehensive plan. An automotive manufacturing plant is probably one of the most intense industrial uses. So you would have to say, Village Council, this is a great job opportunity, but it's not consistent with our comprehensive plan. You cannot add to our industrial zoning district heavy manufacturing, because our comp plan only allows light and medium scale industrial uses. And let's see a last one. You have an industrially zoned property, and you want to redesignate that property to the industrial use in the comprehensive plan. But the property is next to conservation. Would you be able to do that? And again, the answer is probably not. And the reason's going to be, if you look at our conservation element, it specifically says that we want to remove industrial uses from the area. So as a general policy, you would say, Village Council, I'm sorry, but you're not going to be able to do this because it's next to a conservation area, and we want to eliminate as much as possible that threat of industrial use from our conservation area. So these are the types of analyses that are extreme, but I wanted to show you a couple of hypotheticals of what you will be getting when you get your agenda items and you have a proposal before you, let's say for, I don't know, art in public places. I had a feeling I'd get a reaction out of that one. But in all, to wrap things up, your job as as the local agency planning board is going to be to look at the ordinances, the comprehensive plan amendments that are presented to you. You're going to analyze them, make sure that they're consistent with our comprehensive plan, and make a recommendation one way or another. That's your general function. Any questions?
Comment. This is directed to staff. I really appreciate when we're looking at something before us and staff makes a recommendation. I've noticed recently we have several where there hasn't been a recommendation. I tend to value your opinion. You know the laws, you know the rules far better than we. You remember them. And so whether I agree or disagree, it's nice to have the recommendation there to be able to help us move forward. And with that said, are we correct in assuming when there is no recommendation that we really don't have an opinion on this?
So I can speak to some of the recent ones. When previous planning director left the employee of the village, there was a bunch of stuff on the desk that I just moved forward that I did not create, that I did not, bring forward, but I wanted to just move them forward. So I did not have a recommendation on those one way or the other because they did not come from me. So that's why some of those did not have recommendations moving forward. And then I know I think the recent two housekeeping items that came from the village attorney's office he doesn't tend to put recommendations when John Quick writes, ones, he doesn't tend to do recommendations, and I can't speak for him. I don't know why that is. But when I put something forward to you, it will have a recommendation one way or the other.
Good.
Aren't there certain categories of ordinances that you are not really supposed to be making a recommendation? You're just, I guess it falls more in the quasi-judicial, but we see the quasi-judicial before the council does at quasi-judicial level. Maybe I know that there's been items, it seems like it's a certain category that, and I can't think of an example, of course.
I was going to say, I don't know of one, and
Okay.
you don't typically see quasi-judicial before the council.
They wouldn't be quasi-judicial when they come before us. They would be
We don't have quasi-judicial.
Right, that's what I'm saying. They would only be quasi-judicial when they go to the council, correct?
Right, they're not quasi-judicial when they're in our
But
realm.
the only quasi-judicial that would,
No. I think, look, as a general rule of thumb, this board is meant to deal with issues of the comprehensive plan, and the comprehensive plan is a legislative function. And what do I mean by that? When you say quasi-judicial, it is really when a board, right, is sitting in a matter specifically seeking to apply the law to a particular set of facts. Here, we're sitting as a legislative function, right? We're just making recommendations based on the laws that are being provided to us and comparing them to the comprehensive plan and whether they're consistent. But we're not giving individuals, in other words, Allison is not applying to rezone her property and bringing it before the local planning agency. Does that make sense? You're not dealing with property-specific issues where an applicant will have rights, and it's before, it's supposed to be before, right, it's before a neutral decision maker with testimony that's being taken in under oath, and basing your decisions on competent, substantial evidence. Here, it's purely a legislative function.
So,
But in front of us, we see that Allison brings a piece of land to us and asks for a recommendation from us of whether it should be rezoned. We've seen that before.
yeah, so one of our quasi judicials is site-specific rezoning, so they would see that, but not as a quasi judicial, just as a hearing before the board for a recommendation. Only if it's site-specific, not like a group rezoning. Is that what you're asking? But I'm looking at all the quasi judicials, that would be the only one
Okay.
that you would do.
Maybe I chose quasi judicial. I just was thinking that there had been a category in the past that you didn't, not you specifically, the planning director didn't make a recommendation to, but we saw it. Just, it's part of it comes from my sitting on council. There seemed to be, and I can't give you a perfect example as my problem, is a category of items that they didn't really say, well, it's up to the council to decide whether it's yay or nay or right or wrong. It didn't have a recommendation from the planning director. I'm like Tony. I like to see some recommendations because I consider the staff the professionals, whether we're talking at the lawyer level or the planning director or the staff, whatever that is. I like, because that's your everyday job. Our job is to try to help, but I like to see recommendations. Then I may not agree with them, but
Okay.
So if I'm wrong, that's fine. I came to cause trouble, remember? That's why we have two lawyers tonight.
I will say, if you have a particular matter that, you recall later, feel free to reach out to our office and we'll sit down and,
I'm not very shy about calling you guys.
absolutely. That's why we're here.
I think this board has reached out to staff several times, and I hope that they continue to do that because that's how we learn.
Absolutely. Any other questions? Perfect.
Jennifer, you got anything you want to add?
No, I just wanted to thank Roger and Allison so much for coming and doing this. I think it was helpful, and hopefully you guys learned some stuff. I know I did, and really appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And like I said, we're always available.
Thank you for the time you took to do a nice presentation. Very well done.
Did, just a curious note, did Susan ever manage to get on? That's okay. It's okay.
We will be having a January meeting. We will have several items on that agenda. Right now, it's, I think, at 4. It potentially could be 5, so.
And that meeting's like the 9th
The
of,
9th, I believe, if
I
that's
think it's the
right.
9th, so that everybody can plan their schedules,
Yep.
okay? And, yeah.
9th through the 8th.
What
I'm
was
sorry?
that, Cheryl? Oh, it's the 8th.
January.
It is the 8th, I
The
apologize.
8th is, okay,
The 9th is the
Whatever.
council meeting, that's why.
right. Right,
realize
we had that discussion last
that's
meeting
right.
of our, yeah, it's the 8th, whatever the Monday is. The Monday's the 8th. We had that discussion last time, the fact that our meeting is falling the day before, and with the promise that Jennifer would bring it back to us if it becomes a real issue for her. We're not here to interrupt.
It's already white, so I can't get any whiter.
We're not here to interrupt staff, we're here to help. So, Cheryl, do you have any other comments? I'm going to go around the table, so.
No, it's going to be a short meeting on the 8th. It's the night of the national championship.
Oh, sorry about that. Something better be recorded. Jim, you got anything you want to say?
Thank you very much. No, thank you, guys.
Lori?
No, nothing.
Patrick? Tony?
Thank you very much.
Motion to adjourn?
Very helpful. Thank you.
All right, I guess that's it, unless there's anything else that anybody wants to bring up? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Move to adjourn.
Okay, and a second? All in favor?
Patrick, second.
Yes. All right, thank you.